Yes, Samsung has an Exynos version of the Galaxy S24 Plus and the regular S24. And you're wondering, why am I cursed this year for having the Exynos version in my region? Well, we're going to talk about the Exynos version, if it's actually up to snuff or as Samsung made a mistake again this year. Hey guys, Thunder E here, and welcome to another battle vid on the channel. Today we're going to be comparing the S24 Plus, both the Exynos version, against the Snapdragon H Gen 3 to find out if the Exynos version actually has caught up to what Snapdragon's been doing the last couple of years. So let's just put it this way. Samsung has, in other regions outside the US, the S24 Plus and the S24 are running Exynos 2400. That is the chipset in every other region other than the US. The Ultra still remains at the Snapdragon, of course, H Gen 3. So what's the difference with the Exynos 2400? Is it the same? Is it something else? Or does it actually match what we have here? Now, I just want to point out that the devices are the same. Samsung has the same hardware in terms of the display for both devices, the fingerprint sensor, as well as also just the camera and build. It's just the chip that is different. So to differentiate it here, I do have the orange Exynos version of the S24 Plus with Sukuna as the wallpaper. And then we have Gojo on the cream version here with the Snapdragon H Gen 3. So let's jump into benchmarks to see what we have looking at Geekbench 6 to find out if there's any difference. So with single core scores, the Exynos racks in at 2,207, which is pretty good compared to the single core of the Snapdragon at 2,322. Multi-core, Exynos is at 6,916, while the Snapdragon is at 7,149. So Snapdragon clearly beats it here, but that's not to say that the Exynos is behind, because I did have lower scores in the past that actually matched or even lower on the Snapdragon. So I would say Exynos is within the range and matches quite well. Then moving over to 3D Mark, let's look at some benchmark scores there. Starting off with Wildlife Extreme. On the Exynos 2400, we have Vulkan scores for Wildlife Extreme at 4,287 compared to 4,892 on the Snapdragon H Gen 3. And then looking at Solo Bay, we have an Exynos 8,725 and a pretty close but slightly higher Snapdragon at 8,852. Again, similar scores with, of course, the Snapdragon slightly, just edging ahead. So what does that tell us for benchmarks? It means that Exynos has really bumped up its benchmarks and it's within the range of what Snapdragon actually has to offer. Sometimes you would get slightly lesser scores or higher, but I feel like in terms of benchmark scores, they're pretty much close together. I don't know. What do you guys think? Now at this point, let's go ahead and jump into the games that we expect to see. We're playing 4 games here, running some benchmarks on them. Start off with Call of Duty Mobile. Very simple one. We can play both games at the settings of course, ultra medium settings, which should give us 120 frames per second, at least standard. Looking at the Exynos, we're getting between 113 to about 118 frames per second, which is nice. It did stay closer to the lower 113 for a while. And 114, but again, it's way above 100 frames per second, so it's solid, but just noticing some of that differentiation there. Now with the Snapdragon here, again playing at ultra medium settings, we're able to get between 115 to 118. It did dip down certain points in time, but it always try to go back to even closer to 120. Again, slight variance with the Snapdragon slightly ahead, but nothing to say that it is fully better than what the Exynos brings to the table. Now, our next game, PUBG Mobile, for both devices, we can play them at 90 frames per second, which is good to see. And while playing both games, we saw the frame rates roughly around 88, 89 frames per second for both devices. There were some lower dips here and there, but honestly, they were pretty much on par playing on the Exynos 2400 and the Snapdragon H Gen 3. Now jumping to a new game I added for this video. I know you guys are always asking for newer games. I added War Thunder and I was able to play this at the max setting, which includes 120 frames per second. Now looking at that for both devices, when you start off the game, you can start off at 120 frames per second, but as you move in and roughly about 5 minutes and maybe 7 minutes into gameplay, the frame rates do drop, but it does drop higher on the Exynos 2400, its lowest point at 88 frames per second, and ranged between 88 to about 90 something, while the Snapdragon dropped to about, say, 90s, I would say 96, and then it also moved all the way back up to about 113. So I would say here with this game though, you do see some of the differentiation with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, and also the GPU usage. The GPU usage on the Exynos was definitely maxed out more, close to 100%, while Snapdragon wasn't. But again, it's just something just to point out to show you here. And finally, Genshin Impact. I did do a 20-minute gameplay sessions of both devices. On the Exynos, of course, I played at 60 frames per second in terms of settings, and it ran at 60 frames per second for that full 20 minutes gameplay. It ran pretty well, very solid. And then moving over to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 version of the Galaxy S24 Plus, it also ran at 60 frames per second, so that was pretty cool. Now, when we looked at temperatures, starting from War Thunder, or moving all the way to Genshin Impact, we got about temperatures of about 41 to 42 degrees, which is about 105 to 107 degrees Fahrenheit. So that was consistent for both devices, which means Samsung's cooling is pretty good at keeping it consistently at the same temperatures for both devices, but also means that the output might be very similar in terms of just internal temperatures you get from either Exynos 2400 or the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. Now, the next question, of course, you guys will ask is, what about battery life? So I did start both devices at 100%, and we came down to about 53% for the Exynos 2400 and 50% for the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. Now, as I'm talking to you guys, it actually dipped down to 49% for the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. Exynos is still at 5300, while both of the devices have pretty much the same task, nothing running other than the benchmarks I did. Now, this was within a 2-hour, 30-minute period of gameplay, and also benchmarking as well. So take that as you will. I'll say Exynos is slightly better, but in terms of battery life, I think they're almost similar in terms of performance. So what does this mean for us here? Honestly, this is pretty good for Exynos and probably pretty good for Samsung, in the sense that the Exynos 2400 performed very similar to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 in this test here. Performance was pretty good in terms of the games and game optimizations for at least the games people like to play, whether it's Call of Duty Mobile, PUBG Mobile, Genshin Impact, even something like War Thunder. You're getting very similar results. So I can safely say that if you're in the region where they offer the Exynos 2400, you're actually getting a very solid device gaming-wise, definitely better than what it had in previous years, and also quite comparable to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. And you're not getting a chip that you're being suckered out from. So I think the Exynos version this year is a go and a solid chip all around. But guys, what do you guys think? Do you think Exynos is better? Those of you who already have the Exynos version, what are the kind of performances you're seeing in the games you play? Are you seeing better performance? Are you seeing worse? Or do you think it matches to what I have here on screen? So if you have any questions or any comments, let me know. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and always enjoy your entertainment.